And this will open up the pledges for the donor that's highlighted. And so we're going to take a look at Brad Anderson's pledge. The start date and stop date are the dates the pledge is running. The amount is the total amount of the pledge. The payment amount is how much this donor is going to pay in installment. The frequency is how often he's going to make that payment amount or that installment payment. And the stimulus, again, is what brought in this pledge, what campaign helped bring in this pledge. The type is the type of pledge. So if you have several pledge drives going at once, you can track the various types of pledges you have going. And again, a comment is any sort of comments you want to add about this pledge. Now up here in the upper right, we have two checkboxes, Renew Pledge and Pledge Written Off. The Renew Pledge checkbox, if, for example, this donor wants to renew this pledge for the exact same terms, at the end of this pledge, you can check this box and click OK, and the pledge will renew itself. Or if for any reason the donor can't fulfill this pledge, you can check the Pledge Written Off checkbox, click OK, and the pledge will be taken out of the system. So out of any past due reports and the invoicing system in DonorQuest. Okay, so now we're ready to move on to the next icon, which is the Notepad. And the Notepad is basically an area of the program where you can store an unlimited amount of coded information. So for example, this is a great place to store all the various mailing codes you have. So if you track which donors get which mailing solicitations. So for example, to set up a memo, you would just click the Add button here. And we're going to go ahead and name it Fall Appeal 04. And this is how you create codes in DonorQuest actually. So you can just type in the code here. It will ask you if you want to make this a valid code in the future, and just answer yes. And the description is just what that code stands for. So I type in my description, click OK, and then the text is just any sort of comment you want to add about that code. And then I click OK, and now we have a brand new memo for this donor, and we have noted in his account that he was sent the Fall Appeal 2004. And also, you do not have to do this, especially for mailing codes. You don't have to go through the database donor by donor. You can actually add memo codes in a mass fashion. And again, I'll show you how to do that later during this demonstration. So that's the memos. It's just an area of the program where you can store unlimited coded information. The next icon over is the extra addresses. So if we click on this, this is where you can store, for example, a vacation address for the donor or a work address. So let's take a look at the one for Brad Anderson. Now the name information will be copied over from the main account. So if that stays the same, you don't have to re-enter that. But you do, of course, need to add the new address. And down here where it says code, this is where you choose which type of extra address this is. And then you'll see below here we have a start date and end date. So for example, if the donor is at this extra address for a certain period of the time every year, you can check this Ignore Years checkbox, and every year during these months or these dates, DonorQuest will swap the address automatically. If the donor is only going to be at this extra address just this year, you can just enter the dates that the donor is going to be there this year, and then leave this checkbox unchecked, and then only this year will this address be swapped out during this time, during 2004. Okay, and miscellaneous is just a comment you may want to add about this extra address. Okay, so now we're ready to move on to linkages. And linkages, this is how you link your donors together, the relationships your donors have with each other. So a good example of this is the employer-employee relationship. So we'll take a look at this. This linkage for Brad Anderson is basically saying that his employer, IBM, is in fact his employer. And to add a linkage, all you have to do is click the Add button here and enter the donor that you want to link this donor, Brad Anderson, to. And then from the drop-down arrow here, you choose the relationship. And linkages, another good way, example of linkages is linking families together. So if you have a father and a son, or a mother and a daughter, and you want to note that relationship in the database, you can do that through linkages. The next icon over is the notepad, and this is already open down here below, and this is just where you can store any sort of miscellaneous notes about the donor. It's basically like a giant word pad, so you can store an unlimited amount of information about the donor here. But if you have date-specific information, that needs to be stored here on the last icon to the right for data entry, the scheduled contacts. So we're going to click on that now to open that up. Okay, and we're going to highlight the contact follow-up call and click edit, and we'll see how this form works. So the description is just a one-line summary of what took place in the last conversation with the donor or what needs to take place next. And if you need to, for example, paste an email or go into detail about what needs to take place next with this donor, you can go down here into the notes and really type as much as you'd like. Now, open and closed. If you leave the contact open, the DonorQuest is going to remind you about this contact on the next contact date. If you close the contact, this information will be stored in the donor's record, so you can reference it in the future if you need to, but DonorQuest will not remind you about this. Okay, and if you remember when you first logged into the demonstration software, you got a warning up on your screen that said you have one scheduled contact scheduled. That's what the warning is, or how it looks like when you actually use this portion of the program. Down below here you have some grant specific information, so if you have a grant writer on staff, or if you have someone who needs to keep track of all the various dates and amounts of grants that are still open for the organization, they can enter their foundations or government agencies in DonorQuest just like the other donors you have, and then enter contacts and keep track of the various grants that they have going at this time. Okay, and I forgot to mention the action up here is just some codes that you guys will come up with at your own organizations, the various actions that you take place with your donors. So you might have a code, for example, SE for send email. This one is CB for callback. And you can then sort your contacts by the action that's going to take place next with a donor. Okay, you can also set contacts for other people in the office. So for example, if I wanted to set a contact for Patrick in the office, I could do that. The only stipulation is that the people that you set contacts for have to have access to DonorQuest. So that's it for the scheduled contacts grant tracking portion of data entry, and we've actually now finished this whole left-hand side of the toolbar. So I think we're ready to move on to the next portion of the demo, which is the general ledger process.